So this is the part two to a video that I made. This is the history of the unification of Japan. We're going to be discussing particularly the Battle of Okehazama, which came out after the Battle of Ukino, which we discussed on our previous video. So if you have not watched that video yet, I would suggest watching it first because it's a continuation of that story in Oda Nobunaga's story in the unification of Japan. So I am going to assume and continue and pick up like we had watched the first video already without reintroducing or re-explaining anything, just moving on. So after Oda Nobunaga's victory at the Battle of Ukino against his cousin in the north, we stopped where the province of Owari is finally completely unified. And Oda Nobunaga is the undisputed leader of this province now, and Lord. So now his bigger concern becomes his neighbors, which had already been a concern, but for whatever reason they hadn't been squashed up until that point, maybe because of the alliances they had, maybe because they were just too insignificant. The problem is now they were in the direct way of different clans that could be trying to march towards Kyoto. As we discussed in our previous video, Kyoto being the capital, that's where the shogun resided, and there is a political and symbolic advantage of owning Kyoto, essentially. You have essentially the quote-unquote president in your back pocket at that point, and there's a symbolic, cultural, and political significance to that. So a lot of clans were looking to take over Kyoto, and this is where this part of the story here is highly disputed. It is highly mystified and very dubious. So I'm going to be kind of explaining the different and most accepted theories of exactly what happened, but nobody knows for sure. There's a lot of debate among historians exactly how this went down, because the Battle of Okehazama, which we're going to be talking about today, is a battle where Oda Nobunaga defeated an army that was probably like 10 to 12 the size of his army. And how exactly he did that is dubious, but what's undisputed as he did is that he did win, right? And we're going to be talking about what exactly happened and how that happened. So essentially after the Battle of Ukino, there is now a push from another daimyo who is from the lord of the clan Imagawa. His name is Imagawa Yoshimoto. And this is what's disputed exactly what he's doing. There's two theories. The most commonly accepted theory is that he was pushing towards Kyoto, and he wanted to take over that capital, and it just so happened that the Oda clan and the Owari Province was in the way. So in order to do that, he was going to have to take over the Owari Province first and defeat the Oda clan, and that wouldn't have been hard for him, like 25,000 troops to 50,000 troops. The number of troops he had is also disputed, against like 3,000, 5,000 troops from Nobunaga. So what's debated is whether or not he was exactly marching towards the capital, or if he was just stopping Nobunaga's push, because there were contested borders between these two clans, and Nobunaga had been taking some forts and had been pushing up against the Imagawa clan for a while. And now there was this, they no longer were disputing internally. So once, a clan stops fighting internally, they start looking to fight externally, right? Because that's what they do. And so it's possible that Yoshimoto saw it as a threat, and he didn't really want to get to Kyoto. He just wanted to basically put Nobunaga back in his place and kind of push his advance away from his borders. And if they could destroy him in the process, that would have been like a bonus, right? But again, this is disputed. We don't know for a fact that that was the issue, if they were both the issues, if he was really trying to go for Kyoto. I've heard most commonly accepted that that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to march towards Kyoto. But that is very disputed as well. It could be that he was just, again, trying to push back against the advancing forces near his border, right? But nevertheless, Yoshimoto goes ahead and he pushes his troops and takes about 25 to 50,000 troops with him, a lot, against the Oda clan. And they are essentially taking over all these fortresses. They are not having a hard time at all taking over different places in the Owari province. And they're pretty much convinced that they won and this is going to be pretty easy, right? And the thing that's happening during this time is, for whatever reason, their armies are very divided, right? The Owari, the Imagawa forces are very divided. And this is probably because they're trying to, be mindful of time. They're trying to take take the most that they can in the least amount of time. And really, they probably know that the forces from the Oda clan are not that large, so they feel like they can afford to split their forces and take over things faster. That was the strategy, which ends up being their downfall. And this is where there's a lot of misconception, and we're going to talk about exactly what I mean in a minute. So, because their troops were so divided and they were marching through these different forests and this whole parts of the different parts of the province, Nobunaga has a pretty, well established scouting network that throughout the province, and most of these areas, or all of them really, that the Imagawa forces are advancing are very well known to Nobunaga and his forces, because that's where they conduct war games. That's where they've been fighting internally for a long time. They've conducted falconry hunts and different things like that. So he has scouts. These scouts are observing these different movements from these troops and reporting back to him. And one of these reports essentially states that the Imagawa army, Yoshimoto's forces, although they are massive, they are very scattered. And currently where he is, which is the mountain of Okehazama, that's why it's called that, there's only about 5,000 troops there. So his army is very scattered. And this is where I think this is an important thing. And we're going to talk, because it's disputed whether or not how this battle happened, whether it ended at this mountain as well. At some point it did happen in this mountain. That's why there's the name. But common misconceptions are all over the place here, so we're going to talk about that. Number one being that Nobunaga, with like 3,000, 5,000 men, defeated a 25,000, 50,000 men army head on. Like he just marched 5,000 against 25K to 50K and somehow won. Like literally, they fought with that amount of numbers, and that's not at all the case. The reason he chose to attack is exactly because the army was fragmented. He got that intel explaining that the general, right, Yoshimoto, was at this camp, at this mountain, and he was, with a fraction of his troops. That's why it was a good time to attack. It's not like he recklessly charged in, 5,000 against 10 times the number and somehow won. That's not really the case at all of what happened. And a lot of people seem to think that it was this very heroic and incredible 300 of Sparta thing where, 300 dudes defeated 3,000, and that's not exactly what happened. It was still very smart and very cool. Some people say that this happened by luck. He just charged head on, and it just so happened that they were outnumbered. I highly doubt that. Nobunaga is a very calculated guy, and from what we've discussed here and studied about him, there's usually a reason behind everything that he does. And I don't think he would have gone where he got and been as successful as he is as a tactician by just charging head on without any strategy. He absolutely, in my opinion, knew about what was going on at this point, and that's why he chose to attack. And he famously said that, something along the lines of the best defense is going to be the best offense, which is why he chose to attack. And so he marches his troops, and there's different things I've heard. There was a lot of thunderstorms going on, and, it was in the middle of the night. This is why he wasn't noticed, and this is where it gets dubious. So he marches his troops against Yoshimoto at this point, where they're camped at the mountain of Okehazama. And there are two theories of what I've heard that these troops were doing at this point. The most common theory of what I heard is that they were essentially partying. Right, the reason they were caught by surprise is because the Imagawa forces were celebrating these many easy victories that they had up until this point, and they were partying, they were drinking, they weren't wearing armor, they were essentially laying back and celebrating because they haven't had a whole lot of difficulty up until this point or pushback, and they know they have a way bigger army and it's an easy win. I've also heard that they were conducting a head inspection ceremony, which is a ceremony they conducted a lot of times after battles, where the different heads of the enemies that you would defeat were paraded and shown to your general. There was different recognition and bonuses and ritual involved with this, right? But that's not necessarily also the case. I've also heard that they were actually caught marching and caught off guard. So they weren't necessarily partying. We don't know for sure. But nevertheless, the common accepted theory as well is that the reason why they could have also lost is not just because of the parting that theoretically they were having, maybe. It was because of fatigue, right? They had been fighting up until this point and marching a lot, and the army was essentially tired or resting, we're not sure, and just fatigued in general from the battle up until this point. And Nobunaga's forces were all fresh and, ready for battle, while the Imagawa forces were very tired. So as you can see, there's a lot of dispute, right? This happened a long time ago. We don't know exactly for sure what happened. But either way, what ended up undisputedly happening is that Oda Nobunaga attacked while the Imagawa forces were unprepared and defeated them. And this is where there's some misconception as well. It is said that the general was killed right here and there, which he was not. He was later essentially chased down because he ran away, and he was killed in another village nearby by two pretty famous samurai. But I will tell you both versions of this theory. First, the one that I've heard the most, where essentially they attack in the middle of the night, and the Imagawa troops are parting, and there's suddenly all this commotion happening and screaming and whatever's going on, right? And Yoshimoto hears this and he's laughing it off because he thinks that because they've been drinking and partying, there's essentially like this brawl or fights that are happening between his soldiers because everybody's drunk. And he doesn't react right away because he doesn't know what's going on, and he thinks it's just partying essentially, or fighting. It takes him a while to realize that it's actually Nobunaga attacking him, and by the time he realizes it, it's too late. They're all dead. It's said that they weren't wearing armor, that they were caught off guard, right? The other theory, again, is that they were just marching and they were caught off guard crossing this point, or they were camping nearby and just tired and caught off guard in the middle of the night, right? Whatever you choose to believe, that is what happened. He was essentially defeated. It is said that Yoshimoto put up a fight where he cut off the samurai that was trying to kill him. One of them, he cut their spear in half and, hit his knee with a sword, and then got stabbed from the back by another samurai and killed. But either way, the point is that this leader died, and Nobunaga was victorious at that point, which was pretty decisive. And Nobunaga's theory is what proved to be really real. If you get rid of the leadership, the army crumbles. And so as soon as they defeated these 5,000 troops, pretty much everyone retreated. And it caused a lot of instability, which we will talk in a minute about what happened back at home for the Imagawa clan, because ultimately this was not just their destruction in Owari, but it caused them to be attacked by different neighbors. Because whenever you lose a battle, especially one that you're supposed to win, it's a big show of weaknesses for your neighbors. And it's like, all right, if this little army could defeat him, we can definitely defeat him. Now's the time to attack. They're fractured as well. They lost their leader, right? And it was ultimately their demise. So now, not only did this cement even more Nobunaga as a terror, right, in Japan, and nobody wanted to mess with him because he could defeat armies significantly larger than his with his strategy, but it also made it so nobody wanted to attack the Oda clan. They weren't completely out of the woods at all yet. They weren't in the safe because now a lot of people saw them as a threat that needed to be eliminated. But this is how the Battle of Okehazama was won. They essentially sneaked or caught them when they were off guard and beat them with a pretty decisive, I hate to be redundant, but a decisive decision, decisive strategy there. There's different theories, again, of how this battle was won. It's very disputed. I don't think that's super important, and I don't think we'll ever know for sure. The point is that he caught him off guard and outnumbered, and it goes to show that sometimes a very decisive attack in the main army where the general is, and the defeat of the general crumbles the entire army, because after that, the rest of the forces, the other 20,000 plus that were scattered around the province doing different things, everybody fled at that point. A lot of these soldiers were captured, a lot were killed, and a lot of them, again, just went away. And a lot of times what we know is when people start running, when, one army's starting to lose and they start retreating, that's when the slaughter starts happening, right? Because you turn your back to your enemy, they're chasing you down. Think of it almost like an avalanche or a tsunami, right? If you're not head on against it anymore, you're standing your ground, pretty much you get washed away. So one of these warriors who is under Nobunaga's service, his name is Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He's one of the Ashigaru peasant militia type of soldiers. And let's remember this name because he ends up being one of the most important figures here in this period, almost as important as Nobunaga. And he gets enlisted in the service as a general later on. He's recognized because he is a very talented warrior, and later on he's recognized as well because he seems to have the ability to be able to organize people, and he's showing that leadership potential, and he's recognized in this battle by Nobunaga. And he ends up getting promoted to one of his generals, which we will talk a little bit more about. And this is a incredibly fascinating character in the story here and in history, because it is very rare that anyone who doesn't come from a samurai class or from this prestigious background gets put in a position of authority. So here was Nobunaga putting a guy that didn't have the appropriate lineage, right, to be in that position. He's putting him there for practical reasons, which is why I think Nobunaga is so successful. He doesn't have a whole lot of regard for tradition, ceremony, class. He is a very practical dude. He is all about winning, killing the opponent at all cost. If he thinks that you deserve to be where you're at, if he thinks you're going to give his army an edge, if you're a leader or if you're in the position that you're in, he's going to put you there regardless of if you're a peasant or not. He's not caring about that. And Toyotomi Hideyoshi ends up being an extremely important character in history and in this period, and we're going to talk a lot about him as well. So one of these generals from the Imagawa army who is serving under them, which we're going to talk about him a little bit, is Tokugawa Ieyasu. He is one of the generals that got defeated. For multiple reasons, he wasn't really he was a part of the clan, but not by blood. He was essentially a prisoner of this clan that grew up in it and was basically made to serve in the position that he was. So he didn't have the most loyalty to the Imagawa clan anyway, but he saw this as an opportunity to essentially pledge his allegiance to the lord that had defeated his. So he asks Nobunaga if he can enlist in his service. He admired what he had accomplished and saw him as the superior lord and force, and he essentially asked to enlist in their service instead of surrendering or running away. Important thing that I neglected to mention as well, I think it's important to state when this battle happened. The Battle of Okehazama happened in 1560, just to let you know. And Nobunaga was about 27 years old at the time of this battle. So we will talk more about Hideyoshi as the story progresses here. At this point, he's essentially promoted to a retainer of Oda Nobunaga, so like a bodyguard. From peasant and ashigaru to retainer, which is very uncommon, is a huge jump. So we won't focus on him too much. We will focus more on him on the next video. I think this is a good stopping point because, again, this is a pretty major victory for Nobunaga, but it's nowhere near done where the story should be, right? Or towards the end. Again, this is the history of the unification of Japan. Japan is very much not unified at this point. And there's still a lot of work to do before that ever gets there. We'll talk about that. I figured this could be a good stopping point because following next, there are a lot of events that happen after this, and I want to dedicate a video specifically to this battle and this point of what's happening. I will say there is another video other than the part 1 that I released as well, if you're with me up until this point, which is whether or not the samurai really used the famous katana. If you haven't seen that video yet, I suggest you take a look at that if you want to find out. If you don't know, that's a pretty interesting video that I've done as well, and because it's not a sequence to this video, maybe a lot of people haven't seen that one. So I suggest you take a watch on that and look out for part 3 of this video. Thank you.